Welcome again, guys, to another episode of Burning Platform. Once again, no Brian Summer. I found somebody better looking and smarter. Josh Greenbaum in this case. Good friend, longtime analyst at EA Consulting. I'll let him describe a little bit about that. Josh, welcome aboard.
Thank you, Vinnie. Thank you for getting me in trouble with Brian. I'll let you out. I'm sure a caseload of Dr. Pepper will probably smooth the way. But anyway, so it's good to be here. Thanks for inviting me. I'm the head of Enterprise Applications Consulting. I've been in the industry for decades, 30 years, almost as long as Vinnie here. And I am the guy who looks at the big picture on behalf of both software vendors and their customers. How does any individual piece of software fit into the larger landscape, the larger ecosystem that a company has to and is by definition running? And that's a problem that vendors have. It's a problem for the customers themselves. How do we make these strategic decisions given all that we've already got? And that's where I try to help out. That's the quick answer of who I am and what I do.
Josh, so the topic for today is mediocrity or myopia. And it's kind of triggered by a note you wrote a couple of years ago where you said enterprise tech has become pretty mediocre, right? I mean, you focused on the dependence on SIs. Why don't you explain what you mean by that, and whether you think, has your opinion changed?
So, I talk a lot about the culture of mediocrity in enterprise software, and it comes from two basic problems. One is that there is a lot of technical debt. There's a lot of process debt that has to somehow be overcome and implemented in software. Companies want to do, whether it was when we started out business process re-engineering, or today digital transformation. They want to do that. They bring on the consultants, they bring on the software company. They try to put all that together into an actual enterprise software system. And for various reasons having to do with maybe too much focus on profit, not enough focus on customer success, that doesn't get done very well. And there's sort of a collective shrug when it comes time to looking at that and going, did we really get our money's worth? Should we really be doing, what should we be doing about it? It's enterprise software. It's okay. That's how it works. We'll work around it. We'll live with it. We'll move on. And, at the end of the day, there's a lot of dissatisfied customers and a lot of vendors who are making money in, unfortunately, the wrong way, in my opinion.
Josh, I wrote a whole book on that, right? SAP Nation was about the ecosystem around SAP and the massive cost and quality problems and overruns and so on. My view is the software industry itself is myopic. And let me explain what I mean, right?
Okay.
So if you look at the last 10 years, the big markets that have emerged, digital advertising, Google and Facebook ran away with it. Amazon's starting to make an impact. If you look at infrastructure as a service, my God, a retailer called Amazon has started to dominate, right?
Right.
If you look at IoT, it's the GEs and the Siemens and so on that got involved before the enterprise vendors got involved. I have a list of 10 or 15 markets, whole verticals, right? Entire verticals.
Yeah, in fact, they're so vertical, they're horizontal, some of those verticals.
Yeah, but you look at healthcare, you look at just massive verticals, and none of the enterprise vendors, at least the ones we know, Epic does a good job in healthcare, but the ones we know don't even bother to look at those markets, right? And they compete with each other on HR and CRM and HCM, almost commoditize it, and they don't want to invest in newer markets. What am I? And
is that myopic or is that? Yeah,
tell me, is it myopic or is it focused?
Well, and I think it's a little bit of both. I would argue that the enterprise, what enterprise software does is really manage and improve, ideally, core enterprise processes, and those are defined, in many ways by regulatory requirements, by a whole host of other kind of. Again, this is sort of the process debt along with the technical debt. That stuff is there and it's fixed. What has happened in the consumer world, of course, is that there's a lot of net new that's come out. I mean, all of those industries you just described didn't even exist 10 years ago, or certainly 20 years ago, for the sake of argument. And it is myopic. These companies didn't get involved and, in fact, foresee that. On the other hand, I think, for the most part, the large enterprise software vendors that we're discussing but not naming, are really we're trying to focus on the core, what their core constituents were looking for. And bear in mind, as much as they all talk about line of business, vertical industries, they're very focused on selling to an IT department and a CIO. And those folks are, they weren't at the bleeding edge of any of this stuff either. So it's kind of sort of a circular discussion amongst ourselves, an echo chamber, if you will, about what do we need, what should we do next, and that's, I think, why a lot of them missed it, and to their detriment. I agree. I mean, IoT is a separate one. IoT, I would argue GE stuck their foot in it and actually cut the foot off to be able to walk away from it. That industry is still not sorted, but on the consumer side, I 100% agree. There probably should have been a little bit more attention paid to these markets by some of these big vendors.
Well, is it changing? The pandemic has changed every industry, right? Things that we didn't think would happen for 20 years have happened in 6 months. What changes have we seen? To me, actually, in some ways, things have been positive, right? You've seen Salesforce launch a whole bunch of new initiatives, work.com. Workday's introduced a bunch of new vibe, diversity-based products and so on. So they're moving out of their comfort zones and starting to move into new areas. Integrators obviously have had to change their business models, right? Completely move to work from home and not travel at all. I mean, my God, I never thought I would see that in a consulting firm.
Yeah, no kidding.
So is it a good sign, or is it just a tactical move? Whatever minimal they need to do, they're doing.
Well, big question. I mean, I think that certainly the customers are driving a lot of interest in transformation out of a desperation to cut costs, streamline, fix some of these massive supply chain problems, and they're clearly turning to the vendors to do that. And in the process, they are doing a better job in delivering the kinds of services to customers that are defined by this sort of consumerization of tech. I think, there's a lot of window dressing that's going on as well, and a lot of sort of getting it wrong again, the same old way. I mean, look, digital transformation is complicated when it's hard to change the wheels on a car that's moving. And that's sort of what's happening. These companies are in motion. So I think what is good is that the move to the cloud has been accelerated by this. I think the service side of that, of course, is very good. I mean, it's great that we're doing this stuff remotely. It's a really good way to start cutting down on this mediocrity in a funny way, because we're not only doing it remotely, but we're also forcing. It's an interesting sort of dichotomy, but we're forcing a fit to standard model on business processes that does a lot to get rid of the junk that was in there. Every company, this as well as I do, they'll say, here's my core business process, and it's mine and mine alone, and it's special to me and nobody else, and my software has to reflect that. And what's nice about public cloud in particular is that the answer is actually, we're only going to do that if it's a tremendous exception to what is standard. So I think that fit to standard and that move into the cloud is having a good solid effect on making things better overall. And I think also what I love about shifting to the cloud is the ability to use the cloud, obviously, to better manage, to do DevOps, if you will, and app ops and employee ops in a way that you couldn't do before. And that efficiency is huge and important, and a big paradigm shift as well. So that is good.
So Josh, I just bought a iPhone 12.
Don't brag, Vinnie. That's not.
Hey, look. I was a laggard. I was an iPhone 6. I shouldn't publicly acknowledge it, but
it was still working. I got 11 because my 6 the battery lasted 22 minutes.
But the point is, it comes with a 1,300-page user guide. It comes with the latest in 5G network support, latest in battery technology. I mean, this camera technology is just amazingly sophisticated, right? And it cost me, after rebates and all, about $700. And compare that to the average enterprise license, especially the on-premise guys. I recently saw a survey of database support, and it just makes you throw up, right? These vendors are charging so much for 30, 40-year-old technology. And then on top of that, to add insult to injury, they don't even do the tickets. They're like, oh, you're not on the latest release. You're not on this. I mean, there are all kinds of excuses. 95% margin isn't good enough. They still won't deliver what they need to. So when do you think people are going to say enough is enough? I mean, look at consumer tech, the way it just innovates and the price points keep going down. When do you think that realization is going to come to enterprise tech?
Well, and that's part of the answer is that is what's happening with Fit to Standard. But again, I think there's a real core difference between process innovation, consumer, and process innovation in the enterprise, and that is that essentially Apple and the iOS development team and the apps that are running on are defining the processes for the consumer. This is what you get. You get to do things this way. A lot of it is really smart and cool and amazing. I mean, when I can go to a website I've never bought and order something, and when it says pay with Apple Pay, I double click, do my code, and it's populated all my data, my shipping address, mail, all the brilliant. Enterprise, it's different, right? Again, the process owners want to define the process. A lot of the processes are legacy. They're so the vendors are sort of tied. And this is, in fact, as we see this move to Fit to Standard, we're seeing a simultaneous move. And we just saw this SAP's running their tech ed this week. They're talking a lot about extensions. How do you extend these standards? Because they're necessary. And I'm not, and this is not made up stuff. This is real. I mean, I talked to a bunch of customers last week on a project I'm working on. One of them's talking about how they do payroll. It is unique. They have a very special business. No one else does what they do. How they do payroll is different. Education, higher education can be complicated when you have someone who's a professor and an administrator and an adjunct, all at once. How do you manage that? So there are real issues in enterprise where you can't come out of a box. It has to be customized. So I think there's a mix of that. But definitely what I love about the cloud, and I love particularly about the public cloud, is that we can stop having those stupid conversations about how many characters, how many alphanumeric characters is the last name of my customer. I mean, stop, please. I've been in that room. It's just ridiculous.
You are 100 years old, aren't you?
That was last month.
But Josh, clearly you're showing signs of optimism. Things are changing, right? And so I keep going back to, I think the on-premise vendors really need to. They're probably gonna get kicked, right? The most CIOs found work from home. The big roadblock was on-premise. They had to buy a whole bunch of VPN licenses. They couldn't scale the on-premise stuff and so on. So maybe that'll be the kick they need. That to me is the big spend and low value that we're seeing in enterprises. Not all of them, but many of them.
Well, I mean, again, we have to sort of go nomenclature, because what is on-premise? I'm running into lots of customers, and they're not just the customers of one vendor who has a complicated deployment model. There's a lot of customers who want on-premise still. They for maybe the wrong reasons, but that's what they like. That's what they're comfortable with. That's what they know. Even in one of the customers I was working with last week, they are upgrading a lot of their processes. So accounts payable is happening on a phone, but core process is still on premise because they're regulated industry. They're wary of change. They can't they can't do that kind of change in the middle of a pandemic. So it's a mix. It's a mix. But I think
now we're going to have that meeting that you had last month. We're going to argue about different flavors of on-premise, hybrid cloud, public cloud, private cloud.
Well, the nomenclature makes you crazy, but the customer choice is important. I mean, I talked to a company that's basically, sake of argument, in the jungle of Peru, with a big facility, they can't do public cloud. They don't have the bandwidth for it. And they're actually running a modern ERP system that, on premise in a classic data center because they're isolated.
Hey, the AS400 still works. Some of that technology still works pretty well. So Josh, you get the last word. So what's the key word for the day? Is it myopia? Is it mediocrity? Or is it merry, given the spirit of the season?
I vote for merry. I think we, at this point, at the end of this unbelievable year, we could use a little more merry, a little more happy. And let's hope that carries us into 2021 and we'll stop doing these things and actually meet face to face again one of these days in Thailand.
Josh, that would be wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vinnie. Great to see you again and stay safe.